Sarah Martinez hurried through the crowded terminal at Denver International Airport, her rolling suitcase bumping against her leg with each quick step. The announcement for her flight to Chicago had already called for final boarding, and she could feel sweat forming on her forehead despite the air conditioning. Her phone buzzed with another urgent text from her boss about the presentation she needed to deliver the next morning. As she rushed toward Gate B47, she noticed a man sitting alone near the window, his back straight despite the obvious pain etched across his weathered face. He wore a simple gray hoodie, but something about his posture caught her attention. Military bearing, her father would have called it. The man was probably in his early 30s, with short brown hair and intense eyes that seemed to scan the terminal constantly. What made Sarah slow her pace was the way he held his left arm. Even from a distance, she could see the careful way he kept it close to his body, and the slight tremor in his hand suggested he was fighting through significant discomfort. A dark stain on his hoodie near his shoulder looked suspiciously like dried blood. Sarah had grown up as a military brat, moving from base to base with her Army colonel father. She had learned to recognize the signs of someone who had seen combat, and this man had all of them. The hypervigilance, the way he positioned himself to see all exits, the controlled breathing that suggested he was managing pain through sheer willpower. Her gate was just 50 feet away, but something made her stop. The man's eyes met hers for just a moment, and she saw something there that made her stomach tighten with worry. It wasn't just pain or exhaustion, it was urgency mixed with fear, and that combination on a face that had clearly seen its share of dangerous situations was deeply unsettling. The man looked away quickly, but not before Sarah noticed him glance toward a group of men in business suits near the coffee shop. They seemed ordinary enough, talking quietly among themselves, but the injured man's reaction to them sent a chill down her spine. His jaw clenched, and his right hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his waistband before he caught himself. Sarah's phone buzzed again with another message from her boss, but she found herself unable to look away from the unfolding scene. The man was clearly struggling with some kind of internal decision, his eyes moving between the business-suited men and the departure boards above. Every few seconds, he would wince and press his left arm closer to his body, and Sarah realized that whatever injury he was hiding was serious enough that he should probably be in a hospital, not sitting in an airport terminal. One of the businessmen broke away from his group and began walking in the direction of the injured man. There was nothing obviously threatening about his approach, but the way the wounded man tensed suggested he recognized this person, and the recognition wasn't welcome. The businessman was tall and lean, with perfectly styled hair and an expensive-looking briefcase, but there was something predatory in the way he moved through the crowd. Sarah found herself taking a step back toward the injured man, though she couldn't explain why. Her instincts, honed by years of living on military bases and learning to read dangerous situations, were screaming that something was very wrong. The final boarding call for her flight echoed through the terminal, but her feet seemed rooted to the spot. The wounded man's eyes found hers again, and this time he didn't look away. There was a desperate intensity in his gaze that made her forget all about her important presentation and her boss's increasingly frantic text messages. Without really thinking about it, she let go of her suitcase handle and took another step toward him. That's when she noticed the small drops of blood on the floor beneath his chair, and the way his breathing had become more labored in just the few minutes she had been watching him. Whatever had happened to this man, it was recent, and it was serious. The businessman was getting closer, his hand reaching into his jacket pocket as he approached. Sarah's father had always taught her to trust her instincts in dangerous situations, and right now every instinct she had was telling her that she was witnessing something that went far beyond a simple coincidence. The injured man was in trouble, real trouble, and somehow she had stumbled into the middle of it just by trying to catch her flight. The gate agent made the final call for her flight to Chicago, but Sarah barely heard it. She was too focused on the silent drama playing out in front of her, and the growing certainty that walking away now might mean leaving someone to face a threat they couldn't handle alone. The wounded man's eyes held hers for one more moment, and in that instant she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of rushing to her gate, Sarah walked directly toward the injured stranger, her heart pounding as she prepared. to insert herself into a situation she didn't understand, but knew she couldn't ignore. Behind her, she could hear the gate door closing on her flight to Chicago, but she no longer cared about missing her presentation or facing her boss's anger. Something much more important was happening right here in this terminal, and she was about to become part of it whether she was ready or not. Sarah approached the wounded man with her heart hammering against her ribs, trying to appear casual despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She sat down in the empty chair beside him, pretending to check her phone while keeping the approaching businessman in her peripheral vision. The injured man stiffened at her proximity, his good hand tensing as if ready to push her away or defend himself. "Don't look at me directly and don't make any sudden movements," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying an authority that made Sarah's spine straighten. "You need to get out of here right now. This isn't your problem, and getting involved will only put you in danger." Sarah kept her eyes on her phone screen but whispered back, "You're bleeding through your shirt, and that man walking toward us doesn't look like he's coming to help. My dad was Army Special Forces. I know what trouble looks like, and you're in it up to your neck." The man was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could feel him studying her profile. The businessman had stopped about 20 feet away, pretending to look at his own phone but clearly waiting for Sarah to leave. Two more men in suits had positioned themselves near the exits, and Sarah realized with growing alarm that they had the area surrounded without making it obvious to other travelers. "My name is Marcus Chen," the injured man finally said, his voice tight with pain and exhaustion. "I'm a Navy SEAL, or I was until 3 days ago. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, but I need you to listen carefully because both our lives might depend on it." Sarah nodded slightly, still pretending to scroll through her phone. Around them, normal airport life continued, with announcements, rolling suitcases, and the chatter of travelers, but she felt like she and Marcus were trapped in a bubble of danger that no one else could see. "I was part of a classified operation in Eastern Europe," Marcus continued, his breathing becoming more labored as he spoke. "We discovered that a private military contractor called Blackwater Solutions has been selling weapons and intelligence to terrorist organizations, not just small arms but advanced technology that could be used to bring down passenger aircraft or attack major infrastructure." The businessman started moving again, this time directly toward them. Sarah's mouth went dry as she realized that whatever Marcus had stumbled into was far bigger and more dangerous than she had imagined. She had expected maybe a drug deal gone wrong, or a domestic dispute, not international arms trafficking and terrorism. "The men watching us work for Blackwater," Marcus said urgently. "They've been hunting me since I escaped from their compound in Romania. I have evidence, photographs, and documents that prove what they're doing. But I've been running for 3 days straight and I'm not going to make it much longer." Sarah could see the dark stain on his hoodie spreading slowly, and she realized that his injury was still actively bleeding. He needed medical attention immediately, but the men surrounding them weren't going to let him walk out of this terminal alive, let alone get to a hospital. "Where's the evidence?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady as the businessman got closer. She could see now that he wasn't alone. A second man was approaching from the other direction, and they were timing their approach to trap Marcus between them. "USB drive sewn into the lining of my jacket," Marcus replied. "If something happens to me, you need to get it to someone in the government who can act on it. Not local police, not FBI field agents. This goes all the way up, and Blackwater has people everywhere." The businessman was now close enough that Sarah could see his face clearly. He was younger than she had expected, probably in his 30s, with cold blue eyes and a scar running along his jawline. There was something clinical about the way he moved, like a predator that had done this many times before. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to figure out what to do. She could call for airport security, but Marcus was right that they wouldn't know who to trust. She could try to help him escape, but he was clearly in no condition to run, and they were outnumbered. The smart thing would be to walk away and pretend this had never happened, but she knew she couldn't live with herself if she abandoned him. "There's a service corridor behind the women's restroom near gate B52, Marcus said quietly. "If we can make it there, I might be able to lose them in the maintenance areas. I know these airports better than they think I do." The businessman was now close enough to overhear them if they weren't careful. Sarah stood up slowly, as if she was preparing to leave, but instead of walking toward her gate, she moved toward Marcus and grabbed his good arm as if she was helping an injured friend. "Come on, honey," she said loudly enough for the businessman to hear. "Let's get you to the medical station. That shoulder is getting worse." Marcus played along, allowing her to help him to his feet despite the obvious agony the movement caused him. The businessman hesitated, clearly not expecting this development. His hand moved inside his jacket, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something metallic that made her blood run cold. They began walking slowly toward the restrooms, with Sarah supporting as much of Marcus's weight as she could manage. Behind them, she could hear footsteps following at a distance, and she knew they had only bought themselves a few minutes at most. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked through gritted teeth as they made their way through the crowd of travelers. "You don't know me, and this could get you killed." Sarah thought about her father and all the stories he had told her about soldiers who had risked everything to do the right thing, even when it meant facing impossible odds. She thought about the passengers on planes that might be targeted if Blackwater's weapons reached the wrong hands. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said simply, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Sarah and Marcus made it to the women's restroom area, but the service corridor Marcus had mentioned was locked with a keycard reader. Behind them, Sarah could see the businessman talking quietly into a phone, coordinating with his team. They had maybe 30 seconds before their pursuers realized they were trapped. "The lock," Marcus muttered, fumbling in his pocket with his good hand. "I lifted a maintenance card from the guy who cleaned my hotel room. Old habits from training." He swiped the card with shaking fingers, and miraculously, the lock clicked open. They slipped through the door just as Sarah heard the businessman's voice getting closer to their location. The corridor beyond was dimly lit and smelled of industrial cleaning supplies, but it offered the first real cover they had found since leaving the gate area. Marcus leaned heavily against the concrete wall, his face pale and streaked with sweat. The movement through the terminal had reopened his wound, and Sarah could see fresh blood seeping through his hoodie. They couldn't keep running much longer, not in his condition. "We need to find another way out of here," Sarah said, looking down the corridor that stretched in both directions with doors marked for electrical, janitorial, and mechanical access. "Can you tell me more about what's on that USB drive? Maybe if I understand what we're dealing with, I can figure out who to contact." Marcus slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his breathing labored, but more controlled now that they weren't moving. The operation was supposed to be a simple intelligence-gathering mission. "We were investigating reports of American weapons showing up in terrorist attacks across Europe. What we found was so much worse than anyone suspected." Paused to catch his breath, pressing his good hand against his wounded shoulder. "Blackwater Solutions isn't just selling weapons to terrorists. They're actively planning attacks on American soil to justify increased military spending and private security contracts. They have detailed plans for targeting airports, shopping centers, schools." The USB drive contains photographs of those plans, along with financial records showing payments from foreign governments who want to see America destabilized. Sarah felt sick to her stomach as the full scope of what Marcus had discovered became clear. This wasn't just about illegal weapons sales. It was about a conspiracy to commit mass murder for profit. The men hunting them weren't just trying to protect their business interests. They were trying to cover up plans for domestic terrorism. "My team and I were captured while photographing documents at their Romanian facility," Marcus continued. "They tortured us for information about what we had learned and who we had told. I watched them kill my teammate Jake right in front of me when he refused to talk. I only escaped because a guard got careless during a prisoner transfer." The sound of voices echoed from the terminal beyond the locked door, and Sarah realized their pursuers had figured out where they had gone. Soon they would find a way to access the service corridors, and then there would be nowhere left to run. "There has to be someone you trust in the government," Sarah said urgently. "Someone who can act on this information even if we don't make it out of here." Marcus reached into his jacket with his good hand and pulled out a battered cell phone. "My former commanding officer, Captain Jennifer Walsh, works at the Pentagon now. She's clean, I'm sure of it. But I can't reach her on this phone because Blackwater has been monitoring all my communications. They're probably tracking this device right now." Sarah thought about her own phone, sitting in her purse with a full battery and a strong signal. She could try calling this Captain Walsh, but she didn't know what to say or how to convince a Pentagon official that a stranger's story about domestic terrorism was real. The voices outside were getting louder, and Sarah could hear someone testing door handles along the corridor. They had maybe 2 minutes before their hiding place was discovered. "Give me your phone," she said to Marcus. "I'm going to delete everything on it and then leave it here as a decoy. While they're tracking the signal, we can try to find another way out." Marcus handed over the device without argument, and Sarah quickly wiped its memory before dropping it behind a cleaning cart near the electrical room. Then she helped him to his feet, and they began making their way deeper into the service areas of the airport. The corridor branched several times, leading to different sections of the terminal's infrastructure. Sarah chose the path that seemed to head toward the main terminal area, hoping they could find an exit that wasn't being watched by Blackwater's team. As they walked, Marcus continued his story in whispered fragments. The evidence on that USB drive includes communications between Blackwater executives and foreign intelligence agencies. They're not just planning attacks, they're coordinating with hostile governments to maximize the damage and create the most chaos possible. The goal is to make Americans so scared that they'll accept any security measures, no matter how invasive or expensive. They reached a junction where the service corridor intersected with what looked like a freight elevator shaft. Sarah could hear machinery humming somewhere below them, and she realized they might be able to use the building's infrastructure to reach a different part of the airport. "Can you handle going down?" she asked Marcus, who nodded despite the obvious pain he was in. They found a service elevator and rode it down 2 levels to what appeared to be the airport's main mechanical floor. The air was warmer here, filled with the sound of ventilation systems and electrical equipment. Most importantly, there were multiple exits leading to different areas of the airport complex. But as they stepped out of the elevator, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of footsteps on metal stairs somewhere behind them. Their pursuers had found the service corridors and were systematically searching every level. The hunt was far from over, and Marcus was weakening with every passing minute. Sarah realized that simply running wasn't going to be enough. They needed a plan that would allow them to get Marcus medical attention, while ensuring the evidence reached someone who could act on it. The problem was that she had no idea who they could trust, and making the wrong choice could mean the difference between stopping a terrorist plot and becoming its first victims. In the mechanical levels beneath the airport, Sarah and Marcus found themselves in a maze of pipes, electrical conduits, and humming machinery. The air was thick and warm, making it harder for Marcus to breathe as his condition continued to deteriorate. Sarah could see that he was fighting to stay conscious, and she knew they were running out of time. "There should be an emergency exit near the baggage handling area," Marcus whispered, leaning heavily against a large air conditioning unit. "But first I need you to take the USB drive. If they catch up to us, you have to promise me you'll get it to Captain Walsh." Sarah helped him remove his jacket, trying not to look at the blood that had soaked through his shirt underneath. Marcus used a small knife to carefully cut open the jacket's lining, revealing a tiny USB drive wrapped in waterproof plastic. His hands were shaking badly as he handed it to her. "Her direct number at the Pentagon is in my phone's contacts under JW Emergency," he said. "Tell her that Operation Lighthouse has been compromised and that Blackwater Solutions is planning domestic attacks. She'll know what that means." Sarah slipped the USB drive into her bra, the safest place she could think of to hide it. As she did, she heard voices echoing through the mechanical spaces above them. Their pursuers had reached the service levels and were spreading out to cover more ground. "We need to keep moving," she said. But when she looked at Marcus, she realized he was in no condition to go much further. His face was gray with blood loss, and his breathing was becoming increasingly shallow. They made their way through the mechanical maze, following signs toward the baggage handling areas. Sarah hoped that area would have more people around, making it harder for Blackwater's men to operate openly. But as they walked, she could hear footsteps getting closer from multiple directions. Finally, they reached a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only, Baggage Operations." Sarah used Marcus's stolen keycard to open it, and they found themselves on a catwalk overlooking the massive baggage sorting facility. Below them, Conveyor belts moved luggage in complex patterns while airport workers in reflective vests loaded and unloaded carts. "Perfect," Marcus said with grim satisfaction. "Lots of witnesses down there and multiple exits to the tarmac. If we can make it down without being seen, we might be able to lose them in the crowd." But as they started down, a metal staircase toward the main floor, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. 3 men in airport worker uniforms were stationed at different positions around the baggage area. But their posture and the way they scanned the room made it clear they weren't regular employees. Blackwater had anticipated this route and positioned their people to cover it. "They're already here," she whispered to Marcus, who swore quietly under his breath. One of the fake workers looked up toward the catwalk and spotted them immediately. He spoke into a radio hidden in his uniform, and Sarah watched as the other men began moving to block the exits. They were trapped again, but this time in a location where innocent airport workers could get caught in the crossfire. Marcus straightened up despite his injuries, and Sarah could see him shifting into a different mindset. The wounded, exhausted man became something harder and more dangerous, drawing on reserves of training and determination that had kept him alive through 3 days of being hunted. "Listen to me very carefully," he said quietly. "I'm going to create a distraction that will draw them away from the main exits. When I do, you run for the door marked Tarmac Access B near the northwest corner. Don't look back. Don't try to help me. Get to a phone and call Captain Walsh." Sarah started to protest, but Marcus cut her off with a look that brooked no argument. "This is what I trained for. Getting that information to the right people is more important than my life or yours. Promise me you'll do what I'm asking." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus was moving. Despite his injuries, he moved with surprising speed and precision, using his good arm to grab a fire extinguisher from the wall. He activated it as he descended the stairs, creating a cloud of white powder that immediately caught the attention of everyone in the baggage area. The fake workers rushed toward the distraction, pulling weapons from their uniforms as they moved. Airport workers screamed and dove for cover behind baggage carts as the situation escalated from surveillance to open violence. Marcus reached the main floor and immediately engaged the closest Blackwater operative, using the fire extinguisher as both a weapon and a source of concealment. Sarah watched in amazement as he disarmed the man and took his gun, but she could see that the effort was costing him dearly. Following Marcus's instructions, Sarah ran for the tarmac access door, her heart pounding as gunshots echoed through the baggage area behind her. She used the stolen keycard one more time and found herself outside on the airport tarmac, surrounded by aircraft and ground vehicles. The cool air hit her like a slap after the warm mechanical areas, and she took a moment to orient herself. She could see the main terminal in the distance, but between her and safety were hundreds of yards of open ground where she would be completely exposed. Her phone finally had a strong signal again, and she quickly found the contact Marcus had mentioned. As she dialed Captain Walsh's emergency number, she could hear sirens beginning to wail from inside the terminal. Airport security was finally responding to the situation, but she didn't know if they would be able to distinguish between Marcus and his attackers. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Captain Walsh, secure line." "Captain Walsh, my name is Sarah Martinez," she said quickly, trying to keep her voice steady despite everything that had happened. "I'm calling about Operation Lighthouse. Marcus Chen gave me your number and told me to tell you that Blackwater Solutions is planning domestic attacks." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, then Captain Walsh's voice became intensely focused. "Where is Sergeant Chen now, and how did you come to be involved in this situation?" Sarah quickly explained everything that had happened, from spotting Marcus in the terminal to their escape through the airport's service areas. As she talked, she could see security vehicles racing toward the baggage handling facility, their lights flashing in the growing dusk. "I have a USB drive with evidence," she concluded. "Marcus said it contains plans and financial records that prove what Blackwater is planning, but I don't know if he's going to make it out of there alive." Captain Walsh was quiet for a moment, then spoke with military efficiency. "Ms. Martinez, you need to get that evidence to a secure location immediately. I'm going to give you an address where federal agents will meet you, but first, I need to coordinate with airport security to ensure Sergeant Chen receives medical attention. You may have just prevented a terrorist attack on American soil. Captain Walsh's instructions were precise and urgent. Sarah was to make her way to a federal building in downtown Denver, where agents would be waiting to receive the USB drive and debrief her on everything she had witnessed. But first, she needed to get off the airport tarmac without being detected by any remaining Blackwater operatives. Using a service road that ran along the perimeter of the airport, Sarah made her way toward the main terminal complex. Behind her, she could see flashing lights from multiple emergency vehicles converging on the baggage handling facility. The distant sound of helicopters suggested that the situation had escalated beyond local airport security. Her phone buzzed, with a text message from an unknown number. Sarah, this is Captain Walsh. Federal agents are en route to your location. Stay hidden until they arrive. Marcus is alive and receiving medical attention. You saved his life. Relief flooded through Sarah as she read the message. Marcus had survived his desperate gamble to create a distraction, and somehow the authorities had managed to sort out who were the good guys in the chaos that had erupted in the baggage area. 20 minutes later, 2 black SUVs pulled up near Sarah's hiding spot behind a maintenance shed. Federal agents in tactical gear emerged from the vehicles, moving with the same professional efficiency she had seen in Marcus. The lead agent, a woman, in her 40s with short gray hair, approached with her credentials clearly visible. Ms. Martinez, I'm Agent Rebecca Torres with the FBI's Counterterrorism Division. Captain Walsh briefed me on your situation. We need to get you to a secure location immediately where you can provide a full statement about what you've witnessed. The ride to the federal building downtown gave Sarah her first chance to fully process what had happened. In the space of a few hours, she had gone from rushing to catch a routine business flight to becoming a key witness in a case involving domestic terrorism and international arms trafficking. Agent Torres explained that the FBI had been investigating Blackwater Solutions for months, but they had lacked concrete evidence of the company's illegal activities. Marcus's intelligence, combined with Sarah's testimony as an independent witness, would finally give them what they needed to move against the organization. At the federal building, Sarah was taken to a secure conference room where she spent the next 4 hours providing detailed statements to multiple agencies. The USB drive was immediately turned over to computer forensics specialists, who began analyzing its contents, while Sarah described everything she had observed. The evidence on the drive was even more damaging than Marcus had indicated. In addition to the terrorist attack plans and financial records, it contained communications showing that Blackwater had been planning to frame foreign governments for attacks they themselves would carry out. The goal was to trigger military responses that would generate massive profits for private military contractors. The scope of this conspiracy is staggering, Agent Torres told Sarah during a break in the debriefing. Based on what we're seeing here, Blackwater was planning attacks on at least 12 major American cities over the next 6 months. The death toll could have been in the thousands. Sarah learned that the firefight in the baggage area had resulted in the capture of 3 Blackwater operatives, while 2 others had been killed trying to escape through the airport's tunnel system. Marcus had been airlifted to a military hospital, where surgeons were working to repair damage from the gunshot wound that had nearly killed him. As dawn broke over Denver, Sarah finally finished providing her statements to the various federal agencies involved in the investigation. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and still trying to comprehend how a simple business trip had turned into a life-or-death struggle against domestic terrorists. Captain Walsh arrived at the federal building as Sarah was preparing to leave. She was a tall, dignified woman in her 50s who carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions under pressure. Ms. Martinez, I wanted to thank you personally for what you did yesterday, Captain Walsh said as they sat in a quiet corner of the federal building's lobby. Without your intervention, Sergeant Chen would have died in that terminal, and we would never have gotten the evidence needed to stop Blackwater's attacks. Sarah shook her head, still feeling overwhelmed by everything that had happened. I just did what anyone would have done in that situation. I couldn't walk away from someone who needed help. Actually, you did exactly what very few people would have done, Captain Walsh replied firmly. Most civilians would have assumed it wasn't their problem and continued on with their day. Your willingness to get involved, even when you didn't fully understand the situation, saved countless lives. The captain explained that raids were already being conducted on Blackwater facilities across the United States and Europe. The evidence from Marcus's USB drive had triggered the largest counterterrorism operation in recent history, with dozens of arrests expected over the next few days. What happens now? Sarah asked, realizing that her life would probably never be completely normal again after what she had witnessed. Now we build the strongest possible case against everyone involved in this conspiracy, Captain Walsh said. There will be trials and you'll probably be called to testify about what you observed. But for now, you should go home and try to process what you've been through. The FBI will provide security until we're certain that all of Blackwater's people have been rounded up. As Sarah finally left the federal building, she thought about the phone call she would have to make to her boss to explain why she had missed the presentation in Chicago. Somehow saying she had helped stop a terrorist plot seemed like an adequate excuse for missing a business meeting. But more than that, she thought about Marcus and the sacrifice he had been willing to make to protect innocent people. She had learned that heroism wasn't about being fearless or having special training. Sometimes it was just about being willing to do the right thing, even when the cost might be everything you had. 3 months later, Sarah sat in a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., wearing her best business suit and trying to calm her nerves before taking the witness stand in what had become known as the Blackwater conspiracy trial. The case had dominated national news for weeks, with revelations about the planned terrorist attacks shocking the entire country. The evidence from Marcus's USB drive had led to the arrest of 43 individuals, including senior executives at Blackwater Solutions, and several government officials who had been paid to look the other way. The scale of the conspiracy had been even larger than initially suspected, with connections to hostile foreign governments and international arms dealers. Marcus sat in the gallery behind the prosecutor's table, his left arm still in a sling, but looking much healthier than the last time Sarah had seen him. He had spent 6 weeks recovering from surgery to repair damage from his gunshot wound, followed by extensive debriefing sessions with multiple intelligence agencies. When Sarah took the witness stand, she found herself looking out at a packed courtroom filled with reporters, government officials, and family members of the defendants. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named District Attorney Jennifer Kim, guided her through her testimony with careful precision. Sarah described everything she had witnessed that day at Denver International Airport, from her first glimpse of Marcus's injuries to their desperate escape through the airport's service areas. She explained how she had recognized the signs of danger from her military upbringing, and how she had made the split-second decision to help a stranger rather than catch her flight. The defense attorneys tried to discredit her testimony, suggesting that she had misunderstood what she had seen and that Marcus had manipulated her into believing his story. But Sarah's account was supported by physical evidence, security camera footage, and the detailed contents of the USB drive that had been recovered from the scene. During cross-examination, the lead defense attorney, a man in an expensive suit, who reminded Sarah uncomfortably of the businessman who had been stalking Marcus, tried to shake her confidence in what she had witnessed. "Ms. Martinez, isn't it true that you had never met Sergeant Chen before that day and had no way of knowing whether his story was accurate?" the attorney asked. "That's correct," Sarah replied calmly. "But I could see that he was seriously injured, and that the men following him were armed and dangerous. I didn't need to know the full story to recognize that someone needed help." "But you admit that you made assumptions about what was happening based on limited information?" Sarah thought about everything that had happened since that day in the airport. The evidence had proven that Marcus's story was not only accurate, but had actually understated the scope of Blackwater's planned attacks. "I made a judgment call based on what I observed," she said firmly. "Sometimes you have to act on incomplete information when lives are at stake. In this case, I'm grateful that I trusted my instincts." The prosecutor's redirect examination gave Sarah a chance to explain how her actions had been vindicated by subsequent investigation. The USB drive evidence had been independently verified, and the planned attacks had been real and imminent. After Sarah finished testifying, she spent several days in Washington attending other portions of the trial, She watched as expert witnesses explained the technical details of Blackwater's weapons trafficking operation, and as federal agents described the international scope of the conspiracy. Marcus testified on the fourth day, describing his capture, in Romania, and his desperate escape with the evidence that had exposed the entire operation. His testimony was powerful and detailed, painting a picture of a rogue military contractor that had prioritized profits over national security. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with the prosecution presenting overwhelming evidence of Blackwater's guilt on charges ranging from arms trafficking to conspiracy to commit terrorism. The defense's attempts to portray the company as patriotic Americans who had been misunderstood fell flat in the face of the documentation on Marcus's USB drive. When the verdicts were finally read. All of the major defendants were found guilty on multiple counts. The Blackwater executives received sentences ranging from 25 years to life in prison, while the government officials who had been corrupted by the conspiracy received sentences of 15 to 20 years. Outside the courthouse after the final verdict, Sarah found herself surrounded by reporters asking about her role in exposing the conspiracy. She had become something of a reluctant hero in the media coverage of the case, though she consistently downplayed her actions and emphasized Marcus's courage in obtaining the original evidence. "I just happened to be in the right place at the right time," she told the assembled press. "Marcus Chen is the real hero here. He risked his life to protect innocent Americans, and he nearly died trying to get this information to the authorities." Marcus approached her as the media crowd began to disperse, walking with only a slight limp that reminded Sarah of how badly he had been injured during their escape from the airport. "Thank you," he said simply, extending his good hand to shake hers. "For everything. If you hadn't been there that day, none of this would have been possible." Sarah shook his hand, marveling at how different he looked now compared to that desperate, wounded man she had first seen in the airport terminal. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by something that looked like peace. "What are you going to do now?" she asked him. Marcus smiled, the first completely relaxed expression she had ever seen on his face. "I'm going back to school to finish my engineering degree. Turns out the Navy will pay for college for veterans who help expose domestic terrorism plots. Captain Walsh helped me get into a program at MIT." "And the nightmares?" Sarah asked, gently, remembering the trauma he had described from his captivity in Romania. "Getting better," Marcus replied honestly. "Knowing that we stopped those attacks, that all those innocent people are safe because of what we did together, makes it easier to deal with the bad memories." Sarah returned to her job in Chicago, where she found that her experience had given her a new perspective on what was truly important in life. Her boss had been understanding about her missed presentation once the full story came out, and the company had even used her involvement in the case as a public relations opportunity. But, more than the professional recognition, Sarah found that the experience had changed her in fundamental ways. She was more aware of the people around her, more willing to trust her instincts when something seemed wrong, and more conscious of the ordinary heroes who worked quietly to keep the country safe. 6 months after the trial, Sarah received a letter from Marcus with a photo of him at MIT, wearing a Red Sox cap and grinning at the camera while standing in front of his engineering building. The letter was brief but heartfelt, thanking her again for her courage and updating her on his progress in both his studies and his recovery. The final paragraph of his letter stayed with Sarah long after she had read it. "I've learned that heroism isn't about being the strongest or the most trained or the most prepared. Sometimes it's just about being willing to help a stranger when they need it most. You showed me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose to care about something bigger than themselves." Sarah kept that letter on her desk, at work, a reminder of the day when a simple business trip had turned into the most important experience of her life. She never again walked through an airport without scanning the faces around her, not out of paranoia, but out of awareness that everyone has a story, and sometimes those stories intersect in ways that can change the world. The Blackwater conspiracy remained one of the largest domestic terrorism plots ever uncovered, and Sarah's decision to help an injured stranger had quite literally saved thousands of lives. But what stayed with her most was not the magnitude of what they had prevented, but the simple human connection that had made it all possible. Sometimes heroism really was just about being willing to miss your flight to help someone who needed it.